So let's get started. Hello and welcome to This is Recruiting. I am so excited to have you all here for our first ever episode of 2022. Yay. I'm Rebecca. I will be your host for today, and I'm part of the marketing department here at Hackerearth. If you're joining us for the first time, This is Recruiting is a webinar series that we created here at Hackerearth to get together, the best of the industry experts to tell you a little bit about their recruiting stories, some of their insights, and just have a regular conversation. So if you're new to Hackerearth, or if you're hearing about Hackerearth for the first time, we're basically a global company that helps recruiters such as yourselves source, screen, and interview the best tech talent. We're kind of a little bit like matchmakers for tech talent. So what we do is we pair the developers with the tech recruiters and engineering managers, so they get the best of the world tech talent that comes into their hiring process. What our platform does is it basically speeds up your entire hiring process by up to 50%. And we have 3 revolutionary products. One is our robust coding assessments. The other is a live face-to-face face code interview that helps you take coding interviews on the code editor. And to continuously engage your tech talent, we also have hackathons. So if you want to know more about Hackerearth, our website link is right there. But also stay tuned, because as our webinar guests, we have a special offer for you that will be coming up in a little bit. I will give you a little more information about that. But so without further ado, let me introduce you to the man who is starting our first ever episode of 2022 off, Joel Lalgee. I am so happy to have you here. How are you doing, Joel?
Thanks, Rebecca. I am doing well, and I'm excited to be here for the first episode. So what an honor to be the first guest. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, no pressure. You're starting us off, no pressure.
Yeah, well, I'm sure I'm probably the least experienced person when it comes to recruiting that you'll have on here. But hopefully everybody out here will get some value from the day. And again, thanks for having me.
So just to give you a little bit about Joel, I mean, if you're on LinkedIn and if you're active as a recruiter on LinkedIn, you've definitely seen him. You've probably seen his memes and his GIFs and everything else that comes on his posts. He's got great insights, and it's amazing to see what he's achieved in the last couple of years. But I don't think I'm the right person to tell you this. So Joel, why don't you, give us a little bit about yourself,
Yeah.
Tell our audience about your entire journey so far.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started in recruiting, kind of fell into it as so many of us do. But I started in recruiting in 2015. I worked for a startup recruiting company in the Milwaukee area, which is where I'm based, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the Midwest of the US. And just started more of like a generalist, just really threw myself in recruiting, had zero experience prior to joining the industry. And I spent about 5 years at that startup. And I think when I started at that company, there was 7 of us, and when I left, there was over 120. So it was just a really fast-growing company. A lot of growth, and it's definitely one of those organizations where you just wore a lot of hats and worked with a lot of great clients. And so I did that for about 5 years, and near the end of my time at that company, I just started seeing LinkedIn as a platform changing, which I think we've all seen a pretty big change, probably more so in the last 2 years. But just started seeing like people talking about how you could use content and you can use social media content to attract inbound responses. And obviously anyone who's in recruiting, especially on the agency side, which is where I live, will know that it's a lot about outbound, and it's traditionally about it's kind of like a numbers game, really, when it comes down to it. And I just thought, if there was a way to accelerate my own brand, if there was a way to get in front of people in a different way, that's something that I'm interested in. And so, it was about 2.5 years ago. I just made my first like post on LinkedIn, and that's really where my LinkedIn journey started. It just started with putting out a post. I just talked about how I landed an internship using LinkedIn, and then it really went from there. So I spent the last 2 years actually coaching recruiters and recruitment agencies and their teams on how to actually build a strategy around social media and social selling. I did see a question come through about like what platform is the best to use. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, but I'm also getting more active on Twitter. And, I think for me, LinkedIn made the most sense because that was where a lot of my clients were.
Right.
That's where a lot of my candidates were. But I think every single social platform, even TikTok, which is, kind of traditionally more of like a teenager app, I think is becoming more and more relevant within recruiting. So I've spent time on that platform, understanding it and learning it. And after about 2 years of doing that, coaching was great. And, I really enjoyed the relationships that I met, but I also really, really missed recruiting. So after about 2 years of doing that, I went back into recruiting. And so I'm currently working at an agency that's based in Chicago called Hackerearth. And I recruit recruiters now. So I'm on our TA and HR team. So I just focus on any kind of corporate recruitment role and anything that's HR related. That's what our team handles. And it's really, really followed really nicely in line with the content that I'm putting out. Obviously, you mentioned I put out a lot of GIFs and memes. And really what it boils down to is I try and put out relatable content that recruiters are going to enjoy. And I think that's a massive part as we get into like the social strategy and the social selling strategy. I think there's a lot to be learned there in terms of just relatable content and content that's going to be enjoyable for people as well. So that's the angle that I've gone down. And since really, going back into recruiting and switching up my strategy on LinkedIn, I've gone from about 60,000 followers to 106,000 followers in 3 months, which is incredible growth on the platform.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And to give a little bit of context, the first 3 months of posting on LinkedIn, I think I hit maybe 500,000 views, which is great. I mean, that's a lot. And at the time I was really, really excited. But this first quarter, I'm already at 20 million views this year on LinkedIn. And again, we'll talk about like how I got to the point where I'm at. But it's been a great journey, and I'm grateful for it, and happy to be here. So thanks for giving me the space to introduce myself.
Right. So thank you once again for being here. And I am so sure that with just the magnitude of your introduction, there are a couple of questions that will be pouring in soon enough. How did you do it? How did you get there in LinkedIn? How did you get to where you are right now? But we conducted a little bit of a poll, to check with our audience about what were the questions that they really wanted to know about social recruiting. And I think, the first thing that came up, which is like a common question that we get in marketing as well, right? So because content creation and social media, they go hand in hand. But there are a lot of beginners still trying to figure out how to create the right content. Yeah. So, as a recruiter, what kind of content should recruiters create, and how do they get started? What is the initial thing that they need to do?
Yeah, I think for anybody that's thinking about producing content, the question that I would probably ask first of all is, how engaged are you actually on social platforms? And what I mean by that is, are you spending time right now actively commenting on other people's posts? How much time are you spending in the industry conversations that are going on? Because right now there's already a lot of content out there. And so I think a big piece that people miss right from the get-go is because there's already a lot of content, there's actually a lot of room for things like comments and getting involved in conversations. So I think first of all, it's looking at how much time are you setting apart right now for just engaging and commenting and having conversations? And then when it comes to starting to create content, to me, it's understanding and figuring out who it is, number one, you're trying to reach, and number two, like, what are they actually into? What types of stuff are they into? Because I think as recruiters, it's easy for us to think that it's easy for us to just guess like what our candidates or potential clients or people we're looking to reach. It's easy for us to just in our own minds think that we know like what they're into. But right. Even just something simple like asking candidates, like, well, where do you spend your time on social media? Or who are like influencers that you're into? Who do you follow on these different platforms? Even asking them like, what platforms do you spend time on? And as you start to ask those questions, that'll give you inspiration. So again, a lot of times if you're lost for content or you have no idea what to post, a really great exercise is to find people who are in your industry that are putting out really good content and start to consume and start to engage with that content. And then that'll give you a good idea of what is the actual type of content that they're into. And then outside of that, I would say just stick to things that, number one, you like and you care about, because it's a lot easier for us to talk about things that we like and care about. And I think when you are talking about things that you like and care about, whether that's something to do with your industry, whether that's something to do with business, whether it's something to do with even in your personal life, it's a lot easier to talk about things that you actually care about, and an audience is going to pick that up. I think there's a pressure a lot of times to put out things that, again, you think that other people are going to find really, really valuable, but ultimately, if you don't care about it, you're not going to be able to continue conversations as people comment and as people engage with you. And then the final piece that I would focus on with content is, again, just trying to understand like what is it that your audience cares about and what is it that they find valuable. So the more that you can find that out, the better. And you can ask people, you can do research yourself, but also just testing things as well. And I think it's a big fear that people have, like, whoops, if I put something out and it doesn't do well. That is just part of the process. And I think the more comfortable you can get with that at the get-go and at the beginning, the better it's going to do for you in the long run.
Yeah, I think you mentioned right at the beginning also, right, about the relatability factor, about posting content that's relatable. And I think that ties really well into, putting stuff which you care about. Because most of the times I'm guessing, like, things you find relatable will be relatable to someone else out there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think a lot of times, like, I know because I've been trained before, like how to use social media. And I think it's as recruiters in particular, like we play such an interesting role, because when we're recruiting for positions, even if you've recruited for a position for 20 years, you might know a lot about the position, you might know a lot about the industry, but you're not actually doing the job that you're recruiting for. And so your candidates and people in the industry are always going to know more than you. And so a lot of times it's like you position yourself as an expert in the field, but really you're an expert in recruiting and you're knowledgeable about that field. So I think to try and be a thought leader in a field is actually really challenging when you think about it, because you're not actually doing, obviously you're recruiting, but you're not like hands-on doing the job that you're recruiting for, unless you're recruiting for recruiters like myself. And so I think that's where it's like really leaning on the conversations that you're having, because ultimately you're having a lot of conversations with people in this industry. So just being able to ask them, like, what is it that you care about? What is the type of content that you like? And start to just build around that, because again, what you think is valuable may not be valuable to people that you're trying to reach. What you think is relatable might not even be relatable. So I think looking at what's out there, what's doing well, and just trying to learn as much as you can from that is a great place to start. And hopefully that takes the pressure off as well, because I just advise people, like, when you're starting, spend 15 to 30 minutes commenting. And if you can't commit to 15 to 30 minutes, that is like the bare minimum that you would need pretty much every day to really see success, in social selling, because consistency is massive as well. And so I think it's setting that time aside, and really throwing yourself into the conversations that are already going on initially.
Right. I think that ties in really well to one of the questions I was just looking at on our Q&A box here. I think Marvin mentioned, do you have a go-to source for identifying content that will resonate with other recruiters? So, I think recruiter sentiment is something you can find, like you mentioned, with commenting on other posts, figuring out gathering all that data there from the different sources there, just spending that time commenting, I'm guessing is, something that'll help with the recruiter sentiment, right?
100%. And I think like one thing, particularly on LinkedIn, and it is the same with Twitter as well, but particularly LinkedIn, like your network will actually see what you're commenting on. And I think people forget this sometimes, and that's where the value of good comments comes in. And so if you can, let's say, comment on 10 industry related posts that the industry that you're focused on, and you're able to leave a thoughtful comment, number one, you're going to stick out because most people don't actually post that, meaning, not a lot of people actually focus on comments. Right. But you'll also then be able to start more conversations. You start to bring in an audience from somebody else because, again, if you look at LinkedIn and how the algorithm works and how things show up, people see your comments. So it just opens the door up to more conversations. And I think, again, when I'm looking at like what should your focus be, it's easy to get caught up in how many likes. And obviously I talked about how many views I got. Okay. And I did that. Maybe that was a mistake, but it's easy to get caught up in like how many views do I have? Like what are the vanity metrics and all of those types of things. But I think really as recruiters, the number one thing that matters in our jobs is the conversations that we're having. And so I think I realigned my mindset to social media as a whole. And instead of seeing it as something that's like almost separate from other communications, like I just started to include it. So I count the conversations that I have, in comments, in DMs, like I count all of those as a daily conversation. So that to me is the ultimate metric. Like if you can leave 10 comments and you can start 10 conversations online each day, and let's say 3 of those result in conversations offline in a phone call or a Zoom call with a candidate, it can be a really effective source, and then obviously you combine that with your other activity as well. And this is a part of the overall recruiting puzzle. It's not like I'm suggesting that you should just spend all of your time online. Probably that wouldn't be a wise idea, but if you can spend 20 to 30 minutes in the morning, maybe a little bit more time in the evening, actually engaging with people, it's a powerful way to connect with people. And let's be real. I mean, it is really going to be the way of recruiting people in the future, because that's how up and coming generations relate to people. It's through social media. It's through these social channels. Right.
I completely agree. I think building off of that, it kind of ties in well to our next question, because this is again something you covered right at the beginning, with inbound interest and inbound recruiting in general. I think a lot of people have this misconception that, especially recruiters, that if it's not outbound, it's not going to work. And I think we discussed this in one of our conversations earlier. So, can you give us a little bit of insight into leveraging social media to create like an inbound framework?
Yeah. So I think number one, like when it comes to inbound interest, like I just want to say, like it takes a long time to realistically look at inbound if you're starting from scratch. But I'm guessing a lot of people on the call, a lot of people, who attend the webinars have, let's say you have a lot of experience in recruiting and you've got a strong network. The longer you've been in recruiting, the bigger your network is. Quicker you're going to start to generate inbound leads. I think if you're starting out and you're, let's say, 6 months into your recruiting career and you start posting content, it's probably going to take a while, for you to start generating these inbound leads. But for me, it's simple. It's, you're connecting with the right people. So you're constantly connecting with people who are in your industry. And then you're posting, let's say 3 times a week. And then you're engaging every single day. that is enough to be able to start generating inbound leads. And, when I was coaching people, we'd focus around 3 different kind of content buckets, for lack of a better word. The first type of content that we would focus on would be like personal content, which I know is a really big challenge for people who have been on LinkedIn for a long time. Is this idea of like posting your personal story. I personally think as recruiters, we really struggle in the industry, and we have a bad rap. Like people don't think fondly of recruiters for a lot of different reasons. I think a lot of people have had a negative interaction with a recruiter, whether they've been ghosted, whether they've received an email rejection, whether they've just had a bad interaction through a cold call. The overall perception of recruiters is pretty negative. And so I think like personal content and showing that you're like a human being is a really big deal in recruiting. And I just think about conversations you have with candidates. Like the first couple minutes with any candidate, you're trying to build rapport, you're talking about personal things. So I'm not saying that you should just air like your laundry out there or just like go into something that's really, really deep necessarily. But I think showing the human side of who you are is important at whatever level that is, and whatever you're comfortable with. And then the second content pillar is like valuable content. So this is kind of getting back to what I said at the beginning, like actually taking the conversations that you're having every day, the questions that you're answering, the insights that you're getting from conversations with people in the marketplace. There's a lot of content that you can start to generate just from those conversations. So that would be like valuable content. So regular questions you're getting, whether it's hiring managers that are asking questions, whether it's candidates that are asking questions. Anytime you get a question, that is a great opportunity to create content around it. And then the last piece we would advise people on is credible content. So what credible content is it's sharing like your recent wins or your recent placements, or let's say you're an internal recruiter and you had a great quarter where you hired 10 people into the company. Doing a post around that, it's great because you can tag those candidates. You can say, welcome to the team. And it also shows them like your company's growing, that you're a great place to work. So, don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. Personal, valuable, and credible. So if you can show up, with that type of content, that's a solid strategy. And then outside of that, really being, again, strategic and spending time commenting is just a great way to get your name out. In fact, when I first started creating content, I probably spent 3 or 4 hours a day just commenting on people's posts. And it really actually accelerated the amount of people that knew me because I kept showing up on their posts. I don't think you need to spend that much time. I think I probably did overkill, but I think just that being consistent with that is a big deal. So if you connect with someone and let's say they're a candidate you're wanting to talk to, just go and check and just see if they've posted something, see if they've commented on something, and just get involved in a conversation so they see you in a different way. And then obviously on LinkedIn, you can track to see if somebody's come back and checked out your profile. But right. I think the idea of it is like, you just want people to know who you are. And there's really no easier way nowadays than social media to like just get yourself out there. And it's obviously it's free. All it really takes is a little bit of work and consistency on the front end.
Right. I think, one thing that most recruiters have a problem with also when it comes to social media itself, you mentioned like the different kinds of content that's there, and, it all sounds so easy in theory, but, when it comes to, say like the actual uncertainty of social media, because there's trends that are just popping up every now and then. And like, 1 minute it was picture content, now it's video-based content. And I think a lot of people struggle with, what is it that they should look out for? How do they stay ahead of that curve there?
Yeah, I think about I had the answer to that one. I don't know if there is like a specific answer. I think when it comes to trends, this is where like the engagement piece comes in. And again, it's like, a lot of people have been asking me recently about TikTok, for example. Now I'm on TikTok. I've got, I think, 14,000 followers on there, but I haven't done anything with that platform really, because it just wasn't where the candidates that I was reaching, it just wasn't really that effective. But there was still, I still learned a lot, like as I was experimenting on that platform. And I think, really the more you throw yourself into a platform like Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, whatever platform it is where you think and where your candidates are spending time, I think just throwing yourself into the platform with engaging and spending time, even just consuming content, is really, really beneficial because that's how you learn like what those trends are even. And then I think in terms of like how to get ahead of the trends, that's a tough one because I do think that like sometimes you just randomly come across things. But again, it's all going to be to do with like how much time are you actually spending on the platforms. And I think a big mistake that people make is they go, okay, this guy's telling me I've got to post. And so you kind of go into this mindset of like, well, I've just got to post. And it just becomes a lot of pressure. And then you start overthinking and it becomes like way bigger than it needs to. Whereas I think if you just said, hey, for the next 3 months, I'm going to spend 20 to 30 minutes, 15 minutes on LinkedIn commenting, and I'm going to spend 15 minutes just watching TikTok videos with the hashtags that are relevant to my industry. So maybe that's, maybe you're doing engineering. So I just look up like, software engineering or IT development, whatever those hashtags are. And you'd be surprised like what content's actually out there. And then the more that you consume the content and the more that you engage with it, the more then you start to understand like what people are actually resonating with. A big mistake is to just think that you can just post the same content on every platform. Like that's another big mistake that people make. And you can be consistent for a year, but if you actually never spend time to like figure out what resonates with people, it's just extremely frustrating. And I think that's the place that most people get to is they're consistent for a certain period of time, but they're really consistent with just their own posting. They're not thinking about how can I start more conversations? How can I build like actual community on these platforms? And again, that comes from just engaging and having conversations. It doesn't actually come from posting your own content. So hopefully that makes sense. So I guess like to shorten that answer, just spend time consuming and like understanding and learning the platforms. Like that would probably do most people the world of good. Instead of just thinking, okay, I'm just going to post every single day. Because again, I think the posting, it takes a long, long time to see the results. And most people are going to quit probably too soon. And again, that's where like the engaging and just really getting comfortable with that helps. And it just helps you understand, helps you build community, helps you start conversations as well.
Right. I knew this was a difficult question when I asked it because being in marketing, like, we're also constantly looking out for the trends, looking out for things that are there. But, from a recruiter perspective, I think it actually works really well to just spend time on LinkedIn, just spend time, watching things and just figuring out, like you said, the hashtags. That's a great tip. On that topic of TikTok, though, I know that a lot of people are talking right now about TikTok resumes. Yeah. And is that something, have you ever had to deal with it? And what's your experience been like with TikTok resumes?
Yeah, I've never used it. And honestly, my initial thought of like a video resume was like kind of a terrible idea just because I spend such a short amount of time on resumes that I review. And I just think like the idea of watching like 100 1-minute long video resumes just sounds like an absolute time suck. And honestly, like really frustrating. But again, I think like understanding that those things are there and like it's really easy just to dismiss new things, right? Like I remember like 2 years ago when I was pretty active on TikTok, everybody was like, what are you doing? This is stupid. 2 years later, everybody thinks it's like the Satan and the savior for like B2B marketing and recruiting. So I think like approaching platforms with open mind and like looking at something like video resume, it's like, again, that was my personal opinion. But is it that hard to think that in 10 years, like that's going to be the norm? Like, no, I think it could totally be a thing. But I think like researching and just understanding and spending time understanding things and like testing them out too, that those things are ultimately, I think, how you stay ahead of those trends and how you stay with the trends is like spending time on new things. Like a great example of this is like Clubhouse, which is that audio platform. I spent a lot of time on that platform when I first joined, like figuring out how this how these audio stages worked, how to facilitate conversations. And it felt like after about 2 or 3 months on there, like I just completely wasted my time because it was really, really time intensive. But now LinkedIn has come up with their own version of audio rooms. And so now I'm using the skills that I learned in Clubhouse, a year and a half ago. I'm using those skills on LinkedIn to moderate rooms and moderate conversations. So I think like with a lot of these newer emerging platforms, like you just have to throw yourself in. And again, like this isn't for everybody too. And I think like there can be a weird pressure of like, okay, well, this guy's saying I've got to jump on TikTok, so I'm going to go make a profile. Like, to be honest with you, like you've got to find like which platforms you're comfortable on as well. Like I'm actually not that comfortable on TikTok because I'm not really that comfortable with video. I don't really like video stuff. What I'm really comfortable with is text posts and memes. And so it's worked really, really well for me. But Twitter is like actually becoming a platform that I'm growing a lot in. And if you look at like the numbers that I get on Twitter, they're probably I get more profile views on Twitter than I do on LinkedIn, which is insane because I've got 100,000 more followers on LinkedIn. But if I just went everywhere that people were telling me to go, like I get spread super thin. So I think focus on like the platforms too that you feel most comfortable on. If you're not comfortable on video, then stick with Twitter. If you're not comfortable with text or writing, but you're really good on video, then TikTok's a great platform. So again, I think it's just like we can overthink these things, but ultimately like, you never really know until you're just in there testing things out and seeing how things work. And I think like for certain industries, like high volume search, particularly like if you're in healthcare, if you're potentially doing like hourly workers in manufacturing or, those types of industries, I think like YouTube is massive, like I think about YouTube as how much traffic they drive. YouTube's really underutilized. And like understanding how those platforms work and where people spend time will help you figure out like where you need to be and what type of content you need to put out.
Right. That makes so much sense. Before we move on to the next question, I noticed here that someone asked us, Marvin asked us if we have a few tips on how to hack the LinkedIn algorithm.
Oh man, don't try it now. I think like okay, so basically the way the algorithm works on any platform, so this is LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, basically it all comes down to what they call dwell time. So essentially what dwell time is, it's how long are people actually spending on your content. So I don't know whether this is a hack, but TikTok is a perfect example of this. So what I realized really, really quickly was that if you could get the average view time on your video to be longer than your actual video, then it would generate millions of views. And I've got probably 10 to 15 videos that have 3 to 5 million views on TikTok. And what I did was I just put a really long piece of text on like a 5-second long video that would just loop and loop. And the text took longer than 5 seconds to read. And so people would read the text. Let's say they spent 8 seconds reading the text, but the video was 5 seconds. So what happened was the average view time of the video was longer than the view time. So with that methodology, the way that would work on LinkedIn is if you can start a really insightful conversation and people are leaving really long comments, then they're spending more time on your content, which is ultimately it's going to increase the amount of views. So quick things to think about on LinkedIn is ask really good questions, because obviously like engagement is that ultimately people leaving comments, liking as well, but really comments is what drives conversation. So the more questions you can ask with your content, the more comments you're going to get. I also think like, best habits on LinkedIn, especially like when you're starting, let's say you're starting to do videos, like shorter videos are going to be your friend over longer videos because people just don't know you. Right. They're unlikely to spend 10 minutes watching one of your videos, but they might spend 30 seconds to a minute. So I think if you're starting out, like making really punchy short posts initially is a great way just to start building up some traction. And then outside of like other hacks, like I think there's different things that you can do to kind of game the system. Like one automatically I think about is like getting together a group of people where you're all kind of like engaging with other people's content. That's another way that you can kind of boost engagement. But I think if I'm honest with it, like I think if you're focusing too much on hacking the algorithm, then you're not allowing time to like test your content and like tweak your content to get it to a place where it's relatable to the people that you're actually trying to reach. So, hopefully that helps. I know it's like, I feel like sometimes like people are looking for like a magic key with this stuff and it just isn't one. And it's like, and again, like I would focus more on like the consistency, and just trying to get to a point where you feel comfortable posting 3 times a week. And then after you've done that for a while, that's when you can start tweaking things a little bit more. But outside of that, I don't even think there are really any hacks. I know I've seen people grow really, really fast on LinkedIn. Like I remember when I first started, like I would see people get to like 70 or 80,000 followers, but their engagement would go down really low. And it really taught me a valuable lesson, which is like, again, like don't focus so much on the views and the likes and the engagement, like focus on like the conversations that you're driving. And if you can start 2 or 3 phone conversations based on your activity online every day, that's a firm foundation for the success you're looking for. And again, like likes and views, like they do something, but it's not, I don't think the impact is as big as most people think in reality. And the same with inbound leads. Like I still do a lot of outbound. It's just now my outbound is a little bit easier because people have seen my face, they've seen my profile, and they know me. And so again, like the goal should be, how do I get more known in my industry, whatever that industry is? That should be the goal, not necessarily like just engagement on the platform. And certain industries, like you're just not going to get big engagement. Like I think of healthcare, for example, or like digital health. It's unlikely that you're going to see a ton of engagement. But people will still see it. And so I think, don't discount the people that are seeing it and not engaging. And obviously that stuff just builds up over time as well, the more that you do it. So hopefully that's helpful.
I think someone else also asked us, about your opinions on Facebook and Instagram. But before we get to that, I just want to put something on the chat quickly. I think a lot of people have asked us for hacks, but at Hackerearth, we did create a little bit of something for social recruiting. We don't have hacks, but we do have a cheat sheet. So
there you go.
Putting that out there in case anyone wants to check it out. But yeah, so getting back to, Instagram and Facebook.
I think any social platform has, I think Facebook and Instagram, it depends on who you're trying to recruit. And I think the bigger question is like, where are the people that I'm trying to recruit spending time? And I think like the best way to figure that out is to either ask your internal employees. So let's say you're focusing on software engineers, like just ask them like, hey, where do you spend your time? Probably spending a lot of time on Reddit, so like Reddit is a great place to go. And I think it doesn't matter, like to make generalizations on platforms is super tough. Like really what matters is like, where are your candidates spending time? Because ultimately, like if I was recruiting truck drivers, for example, I'm not going to be focused on LinkedIn. I'm going to be focused on, potentially like YouTube or TikTok or, maybe Instagram or Facebook. So I think it's looking at like, where are the people spending? And like for Facebook, what I would do is I would look for groups, like big groups that are relatable to your industry and just get into those groups, like request to join the group, and start to just engage. Like you don't need to sell yourself. You just need to engage and you need to add value. And that could be great. If you found like a Facebook group with 50,000 nurses and you're recruiting nurses, awesome. Now you have a list. So I think it's less to do with like what platform and more to do with like what platform do your candidates care about more than anything. Mm-hmm. And obviously for me, like hopefully that makes sense because it's like LinkedIn. Who spends more time on LinkedIn than anyone else? Recruiters. Therefore, LinkedIn is the platform that I'm doubling down on. Although Twitter is also big as well. And I'm finding a lot of recruiters on Twitter as well. So, if suddenly like everybody I was talking to was like, hey, I'm on, Instagram, then I probably would start to think about Instagram as well. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense as well.
So I think, we've covered a lot about the social media trends and stuff here. The next question is something we did touch upon already, in terms of KPIs and the results. I think you had mentioned about, some of the vanity metrics, and sometimes it's not always counted. Sometimes they make sense.
Yeah.
So, which are the ones we need to focus on, or which are the more important ones to look at?
Yeah, I think, like I said before, the number one thing you should be looking at is just conversations, because that's the goal. And that, obviously, if you're sending out in-mails, it's the same thing. Like, what's your response rate and how many conversations generated? If you're sending out emails, it's the same thing. Like, conversations generated is the number one metric you should care about. And if I was going to set like KPIs or goals for posting, I try and post 3 times a week. So that's once every other day. Again, focusing on that personal, valuable, incredible, like just switching it up, taking the pressure off, so you're not having to show up every day with like valuable content, because that can be pressure. And then, focusing on having, 10 comments a day is what I would shoot at. I'd focus on 5 comments on like industry influencers, for lack of a better word. So people who are in the industry you're in that are a voice, and again, like you'd be surprised at who those voices are. But a good way to search for that is just search by the hashtags that you're focused on. So if you were in healthcare, it could be hashtag healthcare, hashtag nurses, hashtag digital health, whatever those hashtags are. And you might have to do a little bit of like research to find out. You just go in the search bar on LinkedIn, type in those hashtags and see the content that comes up. And then you'll start to get a feel for like who the big names are in the industry. So if you can comment on 5 big names in the industry, and then 5 people that are like prospects or candidates that you're looking to work with or engage with, that is a great goal to set. So, 10 comments a day. And then if you want to go a step further than that, adding 5 DMs a day. And like, who do I DM? Well, DM people who are checking out your profile, DM people that are engaging with your content, DM people that you're engaging with their content. But ultimately, again, the goal here is not likes and views and all that sort of stuff. The goal is, how can I get more conversations started with the people that are going to, be great candidates for the company I'm working with or for a client that I'm working with. So if I was to break it down, 10 comments a day, try and post 3 times a week. And then as far as time goes by, 20 to 30 minutes a day on the platform, I think is enough for most. So that's how I measure it. And then if you want an analytics tool, I can share this as an app that I use called Shield app. It's like $10 a month or something like that. It's pretty cheap. And that does actually track how many views I get on LinkedIn. So that might be helpful if you are getting serious about content, because then obviously you can track like the growth, and it tracks like your likes, your comments, it tracks which content's doing well. And a tool like that can be helpful because you can start to then see like what content is resonating with my audience. And then obviously you can start to like replicate that type of content, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think, first of all, like it's a great tip, and I think we're probably going to use it in our marketing department as well, something like an app like that. So far we've spoken a lot about the do's and what we need to do and everything. So, let's talk a little bit about the don'ts and what are the myths that are there, about recruiting over social media. I'm sure there are something.
Yeah, I just think like just not overthinking things. Like when it comes to this, like you don't need to be like a social media influencer to find success and generate some good conversations offline. And again, that kind of goes into like honestly, if I was to pick between posting 3 times a day and engaging with people's content, I would forget posting. Like if that is stressing you out, then forget that for a while. Just focus on the commenting and the engaging. And I think, that to me is like, don't overthink things. And, when it comes to like myths, like people just focus on the wrong things. Like some people will focus more time on like when they should be posting instead of focusing on like what they're actually posting. So I think it's easy to get lost in like, kind of like that question with like hacks, like focus less on like gaming the system and just focus more on just getting comfortable with being out there. I think for me, like a big mind shift that happened was when I started to really like think about the fact that there's somebody behind that profile. And that really, really helped me. Like, and I visualized it. I just visualized like there's actually somebody at the end of this. And that's the same with like, if you're emailing, if you're in-mailing, if you're sending a DM, like there's a real person behind that. So the more that you can humanize things, the better all of those things work. And again, it's just like not overthinking it and just being bold with the things that you try. And like, you know, I think a big thing that people are worried about is like trolls and like people like, you know, jumping all over their content. I haven't experienced much of that. Obviously, there's sometimes where like people will leave really mean comments and things like that. But, you know, again, it's just something that you can overthink. And I think another big thing is like you don't need a lot of money to be able to do this stuff. Like, again, like I know I've seen companies invest $30,000 on a career video that nobody watches. It's like they could have probably done a quick video on LinkedIn for like 30 seconds off their cell phone that's not perfect and probably generate more interest in the position. So I think like, you know, starting to get consistent first and then investing second, if you're going to invest money into things, is a good way to go as well. So you really don't need like that much money to get started. It's pretty easy to get started. And I guess the last thing would be, you know, I think, so if you're working at a company that's got really strict rules around this stuff, like obviously like be careful because you don't want to lose your job. But like when you put yourself out there, it's really not like as scary as you would think. And most people are pretty encouraging about things because they know it takes a lot to put themselves out there. So yeah, I think you can overthink like, what are people going to think of me? It's like when you're starting, people probably aren't even really going to see it. And if they do, they're going to be supportive of you. So, you know, don't overthink that aspect of it either.
That's pretty solid advice. I think, you know, a lot of people think that, like you said, they overthink it. They get too caught up in the trolls, too caught up with the negative aspect of social media. And like, I mean, it was created after all to empathize with other people. So like you said, that's something that, you know, I think a lot of people will definitely be thinking about more, knowing that, you know, you've just given them a little bit of insight into how to get started. So that's pretty much covering a lot of the questions we had before the webinar. And I think, you know, now we can probably get started with some of the audience questions. I know there's a couple that's been there. Some of them have been answered, you know, with social media channels, with, you know, what is more effective. You covered pretty much everything from Instagram, Facebook to Reddit as well. So I think we can check out this question here. So someone says, I figure when I'm posting that the public seeing my posting is mostly recruiters. Are the people really looking into our posting in order to look for jobs? I have the feeling that it's more to create an image of an expert in front of your peers instead of actually recruiting people.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, I mean, it's a great point. Like, I think like what I found is, and I'm sure we've all found this, like when you post a job in general, the likelihood of getting the candidate that you're looking for is pretty low at times. Like obviously that's a blanket statement, but I found most of the candidates that I find, obviously I've got a big reach and I get a lot of inbound traffic coming in, but it's still on the outbound side. So I do think a big piece of it is you are creating an image. And I think whether you're creating an image of an expert or not, I think you have to know like what people are going to perceive you as. So what I mean by that is like, obviously, like I mentioned at the beginning, I've been in recruiting for 7 years, right? So I'm sure there's people on this call who have been in recruiting for 20 years. Okay. So it'd be pretty asinine of me to think that like me, based on my experience, like I'm going to wow you with my thought leadership in recruiting. And so that's why I think like understanding first and foremost too, like what is the perception that people are going to have for you is actually important as well. So some of you, if you've been in recruiting for 20 years and you're in a strategic leadership position within a company and you're running a recruiting division, you have a lot of value that you can bring. Somebody starting out 6 months in recruiting is not going to be able to come off like an expert in the same way. So fundamentally, you got to look at like, well, how are people going to perceive me? And then you can look at it as like, how do I want people to perceive me? Obviously, like I post a lot of like really relatable meme content. So am I going to be seen as an expert in recruiting? Possibly, maybe, I don't know, but I think like people know me, and I think that's the underlying piece as well. Is like, yes, you want to create an image of an expert if that's the stage that you're in, and you want to be a thought leader, and I think it's a relevant position to be in. But I think people just knowing you is really powerful as well. And so I think, if you're going to try and go down the expert route, like you better be an expert, because obviously like people are going to call you out and stuff, and they're going to like put you in your place if you're not an expert. So you don't want to fake being an expert. But again, that's why I kind of mentioned at the beginning too, like talking about the things that you know about and you care about and like, it's powerful within itself. So I think like that's where like the pressure comes in though, because people want to be thought leader, and that term gets thrown around a lot. And again, like I think like some of you probably could be thought leaders, or you can be thought leaders, but not everybody. And so I think if you're, let's say, newer in your career, I think it's like talking about like the experiences that you're having and making it relatable, and talking about the things that you know. So, you don't want to ever post about things that you just don't know about, because you're going to get called out really, really quickly. But ultimately, like if I look at the goal of like what's the point of all of this? The point of it for me is I just want people to know me. So as I reach out to them, they have an idea of who I am. And I think if you keep that in mind as well, that helps. If you go, okay, in 2 years, I want everybody in the healthcare field to know about me as a recruiter. Then you can start to go, well, how do I do that? Well, it's putting yourself out there more and more with comments, and then starting to produce that content. So, I think that point about like create an image of an expert, I think it's just creating an image of what you want people to know you for. So I know that's a little bit confusing as well, but I just think like I talked to someone recently, and they were comparing themselves to like somebody who was like a genuine thought leader and somebody who was like 30 years deep in the industry. And they had probably, less than 10 years. And I was like, well, maybe that's not the goal that you need to have. Maybe you need to find, another goal, and maybe you get to that point. But I don't think everybody is an expert either, but that shouldn't limit you from putting yourself out there at the same time. So I don't know who commented that, but it is a great point. And I think obviously we just know, like when it comes to job postings, like, again, like, I posted a job the other week, and I got 300 applicants, and it wasn't even a job posting. It was just a LinkedIn post. And I had 300 people reach out to me. And I would say like probably like 2 or 3 of them like ended up being, people that I could qualify. So I still do a lot of outbound as well. But it's just obviously my outbound, I'm pretty strategic with it. And a lot of people do make comments like, hey, I love your content. And that reinforces in my mind, great, like people know who I am. I'm building that trust with them as well. So I think trust is a big deal as well, and just being known.
Yeah, I think building off on what you said about job postings, we had a couple of questions coming in earlier where a lot of people found it difficult to market career positions on LinkedIn. I think someone had even asked, do you market it like how you would do like your product marketing? Do you market it like products, the positions itself?
Yeah, I mean, I just think like you got to think outside the box, and like let's just be honest, like job descriptions are just boring, and they just are terrible. And there's a big difference between a job description and a job ad, first and foremost. Like a job description is not engaging, and nobody cares. Like I've never seen like the job descriptions, even like just job descriptions are just boring. So that's never going to create like big engagement. I think it's like either figuring out like what the candidates care about in the job, and then just making things stand out and different. And this is a big challenge as well, because obviously like what I see a lot is, hey, we've got a great opportunity with a lot of opportunity for career growth and advancement, and the company's growing rapidly and they're starting to scale. And it's like it's just so overcooked and overdone. So I think like if with job postings and job ads, like there's so much more room for creativity. But that stuff is hard. And again, it's like it's knowing like from the conversations you've had with candidates, like what do they care about? And I'm not saying I'm a master with this either. But for example, like I posted a job posting that was for a technical recruiter. And I said, like the headline of the post basically said, how do I get into tech recruiting? ? And this role was like more of a junior level recruiter. And they were looking for somebody who had some recruiting experience, but didn't have tech recruiting experience. And they were going to bring them into tech. And so I could have talked about that and said, something like, are you looking to get mentored by a tech leader? I could have maybe gone down that route, but instead I just said, what's the question I get most? And it's how do I get into tech? So that was the post, like, how do I get into tech recruiting? If you've ever asked this question, this could be the position for you. And then I said, are you sick of your current role? Like, does your agency just give you mindless KPIs and you're burned out? And then would you like to be mentored by a leader? And all, most of those points, I'm like, I know they're going to hit some chord with somebody. And that post, it got a good response and it got a lot of inbound DMs. And I think again, it's getting creative and it's looking at like, what are other recruiters doing? And like, how can I differentiate and do something different? And I think, to be honest with you, as like an industry, we've got a long way to go with this. Because I think traditionally the recruiting industry has just been so outbound, and at the end of the day, like especially on agency side, but even more now, I'm seeing it internal. There's so much more of a push of like, how are you reaching people? How are you like, figuring out how to reach people that other people wouldn't? And for me, like any type of reach out, any type of social media, the first key is like getting somebody's attention quickly and holding it. And job descriptions, like if that's your strategy, is to share job descriptions, it's a challenging way to go. So yeah, I wish I had more insight on that, because I do actually think that like there's a lot of room for that, but I just don't think we're necessarily at the point where like leadership in particular at companies like value these things as much as they will in the future. And I think, again, as an industry, we're going to have to adapt with that as well. Because I just think upcoming generations, like they're kind of just more used to content and wanting to find things out. And I think we have to adapt to that and give them content, before they check out a job.
So we have time for, I think, just to squeeze in this last question that's here. But before we get into that, I just want to remind everyone that we have an exclusive offer from Hackerearth for all our webinar participants. So as soon as we're done with this last question, I will be releasing that offer. And, you can check it out soon. But, let's just finish this last thing. I think Carol asked us, are you using AI as a part of your strategy for outbound efforts on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so I don't really use any AI or automation or anything like that. And I'm not saying like those things are bad necessarily. Again, I'm recruiting recruiters, so finding recruiters on LinkedIn is really not like that big of a challenge. But I know like our tech recruiting team, they use a lot of AI, and the company I'm with, Hirewell, we're going to be actually releasing an AI sourcing platform. We're working on like branding it, but there's obviously a ton of use for that, and I do think like a lot of time in sourcing is just kind of wasted time as well. So do I use AI though at this point? No, but it's something which like I know in the near future I'm going to be using more. I think a lot of people too, like just touching on like probably more so automation when it comes to like marketing. I know that question comes up a lot as well. Like, should I use automation, or should I automate things? To me, like on social media, like automation is a terrible idea. And I think, it saves time, but you lose kind of the point of social media if it's just like something posting for you. And like, I get it, like it saves time, but, I know people who have, millions of followers, and like they use automation on their posts and they don't get any engagement, and it's because they're like checked out. So And then I think too with like reach out again, like my strategy, my personal strategy on LinkedIn is I source people. I actually connect with them on LinkedIn first so I can just DM them. And then I implement like GIFs into my outbound strategy, you know, like so I'll do like a happy Monday GIF or like a happy Wednesday one. I use voice notes a decent amount as well because I just know people aren't using voice notes. I've used video a little bit. I'm not so comfortable on video, to be honest with you. But I think like hyper personalization, especially now, is the way to go. And I think the more that you can personalize things, which is tough when you're using tools that are like AI and automation. To me, like it takes longer to personalize things, but the results and the responses are better. And particularly in the long run, like I think if you really want to stick out from people, like just, you know, again, like this GIF strategy, it works pretty well. But I think too, like it's just doing things and testing out things that other people aren't doing. Because again, we all get those emails. I'm sure all of you have had an email from like Amazon, you know, in the last month talking about how they're hiring recruiters. And it's, you know, even if you're competing against them and you see the messages that you're getting, you know, I just look at like the messages I'm getting in and go, how can I make my messages different? And I think that moving forward, like it's going to be a key with any type of outbound, whether that's email, phone call, whatever it is. Like, how do you differentiate yourself? How do you get that attention? And then how do you keep the attention to be able to drive the conversation?
Right. So with that, I think we've just crossed our time for the webinar, but thank you so much for joining us, Joel. I had a great time hosting you. I know you said you're not comfortable with video, but you were exceptional today.
No, I'm all right in these settings, and like I actually really like the setup of the conversation as well, like just the question answer format. And yeah, it was a pleasure to be here. I would say too, if you know, if you want to find me on LinkedIn, you know, you can just search Joel Lalgee, and then on Twitter, which is kind of I know I keep on mentioning Twitter, but I do really enjoy Twitter. But it's Human Headhunter. So if you want to check me out on there, and then if you guys have questions, you know, feel free to DM me. Just let me know like that you on the webinar, and I'm happy to help out. Just with that, like any random questions that you have as well, and if things come up, you know, I definitely try and just collaborate with people as much as possible, and you know, try and do my best with that. Obviously, like I get a lot of messages, so I can't respond to everybody, but happy to help out in any way that I can.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to, you know, come here and talk to us about everything you've learned so far. I'm sure it is invaluable for a lot of people here right now. Seeing the participation and just, you know, the overall enthusiasm of the audience, I think like a lot of people here are taking away a lot of good pointers about social media, about inbound recruiting, about content creation in general. And I think like, you know, next time we should probably get some marketers on the same topic here, because
definitely
there was a lot to learn with that as well.
Yeah. And guys, I just encourage you to, like, I've only been doing this for 2 years, literally had zero training and really just kind of started it out of nowhere. But I will say, like, I was really consistent with it. And there was a point where I was posting 3 times a day. I did that every day for a year, Monday through Sunday. Now I only post 3 to 5 times a week. But, you know, it doesn't have to take that long. Just be consistent and like take the pressure off. I'm obviously just a normal person. Like I'm not, you know, I'm just a normal guy. I enjoy what I do. And I think, you know, I'd love to see more recruiters doing it, and, you know, happy to help out in any way I can.
Oh, so thank you so much for being here once again.